Hello, hello. I hope that I am being seen and heard. I cannot read the chat because my glasses are covered in rain. So hello to everybody who is joining me. I hope I am visible and I hope that I am audible to you at this stage. Thank you very much. And I'm in a very wet space. Don't trust everything you read on the internet, that is, this tells you, because my weather app told me that at this time there was a 0% chance of rain. But I think this is closer to 100%. It's just one man's opinion. So big hello to everybody. Hello Natasha, hello Robin. I am struggling to read the chat because my glasses are getting wet, so even more so than normal. And you may be able to hear the rain coming down on my umbrella. Oh, that's okay, Robin, that's the way it goes. Some days I'm out in the rain, some days I'm out in the sunshine. Some days I'm just, it's... maybe it's going to stop miraculously on the dot of 8 o'clock and I'll get the 0% chance of rain. Oh, I know, sue the forecaster. I mean, I usually add a few percent on, you know, if it says there's a 20% chance, I think, oh, maybe closer to 40. When they say 0, mind you, earlier it said there was a 38% chance and it was raining at the time as well, so. Ow! Hello, Marlene, nice to see you. And, just getting out of the way of people coming into the pub, because I'm standing outside the pub. And, oh, there's Oliver. And we just saw a ghost tour set off from here. I think it was a private group, but a guy in a very interesting costume. I don't know what he was meant to be. He looked like some kind of a witch finder to me. I know, protecting my gimbal, I've got my umbrella up. The problem comes when I need more hands like this. I have to, my umbrella is lighter than my gimbal, so I have to give my arm a rest. So we got a nice lot of people here for this one. I'm glad to be welcoming you all. Marlene, you dated an English guy from Nottingham. Hello Kurt, hello Valerie, hello Trist. Did I see Tish in there as well? I don't know. Maybe I did. And I don't know whether you meant that Nottingham was adorable or the person was adorable, but of course everybody from Nottingham is very adorable, he says. So what else would we expect? So it does look a bit spooky because I think I've got a bit of a drop of water on one of my lenses, so I'm getting into the spookiness of it. So I'm ready to start the Halloween early. And obviously they're so modest. And we are almost time to begin. Yeah, Tina, it is really raining pretty. It's been raining solidly. It's been quite pleasant all day. On and off a little bit of rain, but then just in the late afternoon it really started raining, and it's very heavy now. It kind of stopped a little bit and then started again, and I got my hopes up, but then never pays to get your hopes up. I mean, I didn't think it would be a 0% chance of rain because it's England and it's October, but John had to cancel his tour. Wow. Mind you, I know John is, I don't know if I assume if it was in the city of York. I mean, the city of York, very, very prone to flooding. It's low-lying, and the rivers in York are very prone to very fast flooding, so I'm actually not that surprised. It's a real shame, but I'm here, so let's not cancel. Raining in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Well, that's a real shame, but it is time to make a start. So actually, I'm going to show you where I am to start with. Let me turn around this camera because I can hear the council house clock chiming, and I am in the courtyard of the Old Trip to Jerusalem, which claims to be the oldest inn in England, which it's not actually. It is not actually the oldest inn even in Nottingham, but it is a very old pub. As a pub, we know it has been running since, well, for around 500 years now, but we also know that it has been serving drinks on this site. There has been drinks served for a lot longer, because this was where the brewery that served Nottingham Castle was, because Nottingham Castle is perched just up to my right on a sandstone rock, 45 metres or about 140 feet high, dominating the city, and below the castle, this was where the brewery was that was serving the castle. So that's where we are, and so we're starting our tour, and I'm delighted that you've all been able to join me this evening for this early Halloween tour, and I'm delighted that you are here with me in my home city. And despite the weather, I'm looking forward to sharing some... Oh, I just got a big raindrop right down with my glasses in my eye. Lovely. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the ghost stories with you as we make our way around. And of course, starting at a pub is the only way to start a tour, and we should start at a haunted pub. So, oh, Elizabeth, you've got a poster in a frame of the trip. It's a great pub. It does have a couple of strange stories associated with it. It is said to be haunted by the ghost of a lady from the Victorian age wearing a heavy crinoline dress, who is seen in the courtyard close to the entrance to the cellar, from the outdoor entrance to the cellar. And there's a very strange story within the pub as well concerning one of its decorations. Now, the Trip is a very interesting pub because it goes back into the Castle Rock. So the buildings at the rear, sorry, the rooms at the rear of the building are actually cut into the rock. So you're essentially in a cave when you're sitting having your drink, if you're towards the rear of the pub. And upstairs in one of those rooms is an old model of a ship. It's on a shelf. It's a galleon, and it is reputed to be cursed, a cursed galleon. And for many years it was covered in dust, thick dust, because the story that had been passed down was that the galleon was cursed, and the last 3 people that attempted to clean this model ship, this galleon, had actually died in mysterious circumstances within a year. And so nobody ever touched it again, and it gathered dust for decades on this shelf, until one of the managers of the pub said, you know, I can't be doing with this superstition about curses, and so they cleaned it. It's a few years ago. Now, they got away with it, but only just, because a couple of months after they cleaned the galleon, they were involved in a road traffic accident while driving home. They survived, but they were seriously injured in that crash, and it has not been cleaned again since. And as you rightly say, the moral of the story is never do the dusting. But a couple of strange stories associated with the trip through Jerusalem. Let's make our way out onto the streets of Nottingham. Now, the castle is very poorly lit. We may just about be able to see a little bit of the castle rock there in the light from the street lamp. So this sandstone rock where King William I decided to build a castle back in the 1080s, and ever since then it has dominated the city. Although the castle that's up there these days is not the medieval fortress that we might think of as being a castle. You know, it's very much a 18th century mansion house that was built by the Duke of Newcastle, because the original medieval fortified castle inside the castle walls was demolished, destroyed by bombardment during the English Civil War in the 1640s. But what we see here are some of the way that the fortifications have been added to the natural defences of this sandstone rock. The mansion upon the castle, inside the castle grounds these days, is a museum and gallery. It has been for over 100 years now, well over 100 years, and it has had its share of strange stories about hauntings, particularly involving security guards, because they have reported that alarms will go off in rooms that are not accessible without passing through several other alarmed zones first. A bit of a mystery how an alarm can suddenly go off there. When they get there, can't see anything wrong, but they've reported that the room suddenly goes cold. There are flashing lights, and the actual electric lights of the room start to flash on and off rapidly as they are standing in the room. Now, the castle grounds are also reputed to be haunted by a Queen of England. And I mentioned this Queen yesterday on my tour of Gloucester, because we were talking about the tomb of King Edward II, and I said that Edward II was imprisoned by his wife Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer, and they were ruling England. Once they'd locked up King Edward II, they were ruling England from here at Nottingham Castle, this great royal fortification. And when Mortimer was seized and taken away, Queen Isabella shouted to her son Edward III, as he became, who had led the troops in there to claim his throne. Fair, she said, "My son, have mercy on fair Mortimer." And she shouted that to him, and she would have been speaking in Old French because she was a French princess. And so that particular voice is heard, a disembodied voice shouting something in an unintelligible language. People have heard that down the years, including soldiers, English and American soldiers stationed there during the Second World War. Naturally, Edward II was the one who had reputedly male lovers. Yes, he certainly had very close male friends who were called his favourites, and you draw your own conclusions. Now, hanging over the castle walls tonight, ready for Halloween, we have these very gruesome illuminated claws. I don't know whether you can make them out very well. Really quite strange things. They are like claws, fangs, but they look like claws, like some huge beast is climbing over the walls. And it's quite interesting that this particular part of the castle walls is another part that is reputed to be haunted. And we have to go back to the year 1212. It's in 1212. Our king was King John, a king we might be familiar with from the Robin Hood legends, among other things. And King John was having a lot of trouble with uprisings from various nobles, and he was having the particular trouble with Welsh nobles uprisings against him, and he signed a treaty with them, but he didn't feel that that might be enough to keep them on the straight and narrow. So to help them to focus their minds a little bit on keeping the peace, he took hostages from the leading families of the Welsh nobles, and he imprisoned them. They're sons of the leading Welsh nobles, young boys, brought them here to Nottingham Castle. Now, having their sons held captive by the English king was evidently not enough incentive for the Welsh nobles to keep the peace, and they staged further uprisings. So King John said, okay, I have to show them that I'm a man of my word. And so what he did was to bring these 23 young Welsh boys up to the top of the castle walls here, the 12th century castle walls, and he hanged them over the outside of the castle walls, just strung them up there. And their voices have also reputedly been heard echoing down the centuries, young boys calling for mercy in English, in Welsh. And there are some people who say that King John does not deserve the name Bad King John. That is not a time when he covered himself in glory. It is not one of the nicest episodes in our English history. Now, we can't do a tour of Nottingham, especially around the castle, without having a look at this gentleman, Robin Hood. And of course, King John features very heavily in a lot of the Robin Hood legends. But and actually, he's been very well illuminated by the by those claws that are sticking over the walls here. Fantastic. Robin Hood's ghost is not reputed to be anywhere here. Oh, the Michael Praed and Jason Connery series in the 80s. Yeah. Well, that statue was made in the 1950s, and people didn't like it because the sculptor tried to make it historically accurate, what a bowman and someone who was living on the land in medieval England would look like, and they, very solidly built with huge shoulders and chest and arms for firing the bow. But people didn't like that because they were used to seeing Errol Flynn playing Robin Hood, who of course was quite a sort of a thin, small, lean gentleman, and so they didn't really like the statue of Robin Hood that much. And the sculptor actually changed the design so that it looked, certainly around the headwear and that kind of thing, a little bit more like what people were used to having. Yeah, absolutely, James Woodford. He was a very respected sculptor of his day, and particularly well known for carving historical figures with great well-researched accuracy. So we're heading along Castle Gate, which is the street that leads from the castle down into the city. Gate, because that was the old Scandinavian word for a street. Gata still is the word for a street in Scandinavian languages today, and that reminds us that Nottingham was part of England. It was one of the areas of England that was ruled by the Vikings back in the day. In Castle Gate, we're heading away from the castle, but down towards the centre of the city. And the castle is up there on its rock, and Nottingham originally was built on two hills. So you had the original town, which is where we're going to finish a little bit later. That was the Anglo-Saxon town, that's where the Vikings were. And then when the Normans came, they built the castle on an adjacent hill or rock. And then as time went on, you had trade going on, and both of the settlements then started to kind of expand and meet in the middle. And so these days you have the two raised sections of the city and then the modern centre of town in the middle of them. And it kind of is where these two original settlements, known as the English town and the French town, where they actually met. So we started at the trip to Jerusalem, and we've got another very old pub here, which is called the Old Salutation Inn, universally known in Nottingham as either the Old Sal or just the Sal. Oh, they're all ready for Halloween. Look at him. I don't think that was there earlier when I walked past. I'm not sure. The Salutation, the date on the building is 1243, which is certainly the age of at least parts of the building. We don't think it's been an inn for quite that long. It originally was a lodging house that belonged to a little monastery that was close to here. But we know that by the early 14th century it was an inn, because in the National Archives there are documents from the royal treasury of King Edward III, early 14th century, and that records that while the king was staying at the royal castle, some of his soldiers were lodged here at the sign of the Salutation. That's what the Royal Treasury Archive reveals, and that's where they were staying. Now, like many buildings in Nottingham, it has caves underneath it. Nottingham was known as the City of Caves. The first documented reference we ever have to Nottingham was in a medieval writing of around the 10th century, when it is written in one of the old languages of Britain at that time, one of the old Celtic languages, and it is recorded as the City of Caves. And that's because the sandstone that Nottingham is built on has always been used to tunnel out caves by the people who have been living here, to live in, to work in, and many of the buildings underneath it have been making use of that. And the pubs are no exception, because obviously pubs tend to have cellars, and here at the Old Sal they have 2 stories of cellars cut into the natural rock as caves below the building, and that is one of the places where the pub's best known ghost is seen. It is the ghost of a small girl, a young girl, and she is seen in both of the cellar stories, sometimes standing in the centre of the rooms, sometimes hiding amongst the beer barrels. But she is also seen in the passageways that are at the entrances to the pub and just outside around the entrances. Now, one of the groups that used to run the ghost tour, got some ghost tours in Nottingham, they one of their organisers claimed to be able to communicate with the spirit of this young girl, and they discovered that apparently her name is Rosie, and that's what she's been known as ever since. Now, whether that is the case or not, what we do know is that this ghost has been linked to a young girl who lost her life here very tragically back in the 19th century. She was a street urchin. So as you can, you think about, say, Dickens novels, you have these street urchins who are, and as such, she would be hanging around the pub, maybe trying to get a couple of pennies from the clientele to get herself something to eat. Maybe she'd be trying to get a bit of food or drink. And we also know that from time to time the landlords of the pub would take pity on her perhaps and let her sleep down in the cellars on cold and rainy nights like this one, when you certainly wouldn't want to be outside. But unfortunately, one particular day she came out of the pub, didn't properly look where she was going, and coming along the road at that time was a heavy carriage drawn by horses which collided with the young girl, and unfortunately that was the end of her, because she was killed in that accident And that is why a ghost is particularly linked to this building, because it is where she was often seen during life, and it's also where her young life was snuffed out in that accident. So we are going to head down into the city a little bit further. And we've got a medieval church up ahead of us. It's been substantially rebuilt after the English Civil War, because it was used by parliamentary forces to bombard the castle, which was in royalist hands. They sighted some of their artillery on top of the church tower. It used to have a much more extensive burial ground than what it ever has today. And in the 18th century, Nottingham was growing, and a lot of this area was being developed. And what happened was that some of the church sold off some of its land around St Nicholas and for development, and that meant that they had to basically dig up the remains that were buried there with the view to reinterring them elsewhere. But some of the bones went missing. Some of the bones, quite a large quantity, were stolen by unscrupulous construction workers, because it was well known that bone was a good additive to put into your building materials. They would usually use animal bones, but you know, they were not going to pass up the chance of grabbing some free bones. And that's exactly what they did, and mixed in the bones from St Nicholas with some of their building materials that were going to be used within the city. I know, it's pretty grim, isn't it? Now, this is an interesting building here on Castlegate, because it's had various uses over the years. On this site there has been a barracks of one of the local militia units. There has been a Victorian women's hospital. It's also been offices, and at one time was also the studio of one of the local radio stations. Now, in terms of the ghost, the more historic uses are the ones that have left their mark. So from its time as the hospital, we have two ghosts that are seen. One of them is a figure that has been described very much as looking like what a Victorian nurse or matron would have looked like. So the kind of person who'd have been working, caring for the local women in this hospital. There's also been seen a figure of a woman wearing heavy black clothing, the kind of thing that someone would wear if they were mourning the loss of a loved one. There's also been linked to this time of it being a hospital. Now, the soldiers, well, they've also been seen. Figures of soldiers, but also, very strangely, the figure of a soldier on horseback has been seen on the upper landing at the top of the stairs. And that is because when this was a barracks, at one time it was the home to a cavalry unit of the local militia. And one of the things that they would do, obviously their stables were normally out the back, but they had this kind of, I don't know, either maybe it was an initiation thing, or maybe it was just a thing they did after they'd been for a couple of drinks over the old salutation. But they would ride their horses up and down the stairs. And so that is why people think that these soldiers and soldiers on horseback have been seen. And when this was a radio studio, not only would these figures be seen from time to time, but they would also have poltergeist activity. So they would hear voices when, you know, everything has to be silent when you're about to record on a radio. The studio doors, very heavy, but they would be slamming and opening for no apparent reason. as the presenters and the producers were ready to start their radio shows. Elizabeth, no, you do hear bells. I'm not sure which of the churches they're coming from. We might get a better idea as we get closer to them. Sounds like bell ringing practice. That's the kind of thing that usually happens on a Monday night. Might be St Peter's, might be St Mary's. I'm not sure. We're heading down Castle Gate. Very, very wet tonight. But I think it does make it a little bit easier to see what we're doing, because the rainwater does reflect the available light a little bit. Yeah, that's lovely. I'm not sure which of the churches. Oh, it's stopped. But I'm hoping it's St Peter's, because I do intend to stand quite close to St Mary's to tell you some stories, and that would be quite interesting if I was competing with the bells. But they have fallen silent, at least for now. Lorna, my feet are, well, they won't get wet for this, but my right foot is already wet because I stepped in a big puddle earlier before I started the tour. I stepped down some steps, and the water that was on the floor at the bottom of them was a little bit deeper than I thought. Okay, Robin, that's okay. Well, there's a lovely church here. Not got any. This is a non-conformist church. This was the Congregational and the United Reformed Church, built in the 19th century, but it's the site of the oldest non-conformist chapel in Nottingham from the middle of the 17th century. It has this beautiful decorated doorway. Isn't that gorgeous? It's been converted into offices now though. So we're going to head up the hill in a minute, and going to be heading onto low pavement, and there's a series of streets here that sort of the continuation of Castle Gate that are called low pavement, middle pavement and high pavement, and they get those names by virtue of being the first streets in Nottingham that were actually paved way back in the 18th century, and one of the reasons that these particular streets were first to be paved is because this is where some of the wealthiest citizens of the town were living. So of course they are the people who pay the most tax and probably are the friends with the mayor and the other local council bigwigs, and they want a nice street outside their houses to ride their horses and drive their carriages along. So we'll see some of those grand former houses very shortly, but here we have some of the more public buildings. So the building here on the right, the white building with the columns, that was built as an assembly room, a place of entertainment and gatherings in 18th and 19th century Nottingham. I think the church bells are St Peter's. Now let me swap over my gimbal and umbrella again. Apologies if it goes a bit wonky. Now the building adjacent to that assembly room, this was a bank until just a few years ago. But there is a story around there about poltergeist activity. So, and it concerns particularly a couple of staff who were working late, and they were down in the vaults, but for some reason they didn't get out at the time they were supposed to, and before the time lock tripped, so they ended up being stuck in there all night. Now when they were released in the morning, they were very relieved, but they were also very shaken, and they said that while they were stuck down there during the night, they had experienced all manner of strange things, because they were in a sealed room, but they had felt people brushing past them. They had felt what they said they felt like a breath on the sides of their faces and the backs of their necks. They had heard footsteps. They had seen items moving around. This had continued all through those hours when they were down there. Poltergeist activity. Why might there be poltergeist activity here? Well, remember I told you about the bones that were stolen to make building materials. Well, guess which is one of the buildings that is said to have been made using the crushed up bones from St. Nicholas' medieval graveyard. This bank. Elizabeth, you're not going in there? You don't want to buy it, no? Sure? So here, some of the grand residences, you know, these are the kind of places that Nottingham's wealthiest citizens were living in the 18th century, making sure that they got their streets paved first. Why this is called low, middle and high pavement. The one that's set back there, this is now a designer clothing store. It's one of the flagship stores of the designer Paul Smith. Paul Smith was born in Nottingham, and this is one of 2 stores that he has here in his home city. A beautiful 18th century building, as is the one next to it, complete with the lovely red phone boxes outside. Now in a moment we're going to turn onto a very old street, and it has a street name that reflects its age. It is called Bridlesmith Gate. So we can see a bridlesmith is someone who was making bridles, equipment for horses, when that was the only real means of transportation. Bridlesmith Gate at one time was part of the main road that ran northwards from London up here through the Midlands all the way up to the north of England towards the Scottish border, and Bridlesmith Gate was part of that road, and one of the oldest streets in Nottingham. These days it's a pretty interesting little street. 19th century was the most exclusive shopping street in the city. Nowadays it's quite a quirky, independent shops and businesses here a lot, some designer labels as well, and they've made some real interesting efforts in recent years to give some colourful decoration to the buildings, as we can see here. But a lot of caves underneath here, and one of the things that's been done with the caves is to create an underground bar and nightclub. And look at this for a forbidding entrance, particularly with that very interesting lamp there. And this is actually an underground club. It's one of those clubs that's been here for many, many years, and it's, you know, when bars or clubs change names, you can kind of work out how old somebody is by what they refer to it as, because, you know, the name that it was in their particular youth. This has had many names over the years. It is also reputed to be haunted, but it was a ghost that appeared to have been let out to go for a wander, because in 1969 they were having some renovation work done down in the cellars, and they had a part of the previous sort of cellar structure that was a brick wall. Tish, it certainly looks like it serves as a portal to hell, doesn't it? It really has that look about it. But could easily be in a horror movie as the kind of thing. I wonder if they're having a big Halloween thing there tomorrow night. This particular construction work, they had to kind of replace a wall, and they sort of knocked down the previous wall, but what they discovered was this whole other section of the cellar that had been previously unknown and walled up behind this Victorian brick wall, and there was nothing in there except a very, very old and dusty table and chair. Now the construction workers were a bit puzzled, and they ran straight upstairs to fetch the boss, and he went down there he went in to have a look, and when he stepped into this little section of the cellar, he said that there was a man seated at that dusty table and chair, just sitting there looking at him, and then he turned round to go and speak to his staff again. When he went back in, he'd gone again. But a very strange thing happened. After that section of the cellar had been opened up and the new development had been completed, a figure of a man wearing long overalls, such as someone might wear when they were working down either in a cellar of a pub, or, bearing in mind that the caves of Nottingham were people's workshops and business premises for hundreds of years, this figure started to be seen around the building. Late at night, when everything had been closed off, staff would see this figure walking around. Nobody had ever reported it until that little room had been revealed. But once that wall had been demolished, then he started to be seen. Pretty interesting ghost, I think, that one. And it really is a cool entranceway to an underground club. So we've got the bells again, warding off the spirits. So we've come uphill, so we started at the bottom of Castle Rock. So that's the hill on one side of Nottingham. We've come uphill here onto the hill on the other side. And this was where the original town of Nottingham was. Anglo-Saxon name, Nottingham, and the original settlement was up here on this hill. And the little square across, we've got the tram just going past, and this little kind of square, the junction of the roads here, this was the original market place of the Anglo-Saxon and Viking Nottingham. There's a replica of the original market cross there, and this place is called Weekday Cross because it was the site of the weekday markets here in medieval Nottingham. So the original settlement was here, and that meant that the functions of officialdom were also here, and we're going to go and talk a little bit about those. These days, that original part of Nottingham is known as the Lace Market because it was the main focal point of Nottingham's textile industry. In the 18th century, that was mainly hosiery and woolen knitting. But later, in the 19th century and the 20th century, lace became the most important textile-based product in Nottingham. And this was where all of the lace design and manufacture and sale went on. That's why this area is called the Lace Market. Now we got one of the things we see from time to time in England here. We've got an old church that has been converted into a pub. It kept a lot of the original features actually. It's very, very nice. It's part of a chain pitcher and piano. There's an old church. An old nonconformist chapel actually from the 19th century. And all done up for Halloween. They've got some creepy, well, I assume it's for Halloween. They might just have not had much cleaning done recently. It's pretty cool though. So as we climb further up the hill, we're going to see a fantastic traditional police lantern, the blue police lantern. This was one of the old police stations. You see, this is a kind of traditional police lantern that you might see in a Sherlock Holmes movie. This was the police station with police cells in here until the 1980s, and the huge building here is a fantastic 18th century building, but it is on the site and has fulfilled the same functions for many, many centuries. This was the site of the old Shire Hall of Nottingham. Okay, so from the earliest times when this was the centre of the old town, this was the centre of justice and local government. So it was the courthouse, it was the centre of local authority, and it was also the site of the town jail, which includes cells 2 or 3 stories underground in caves, pretty much. So it's been a place of justice, of incarceration for probably around 1,000 years. We have documented records of a court and a jail here since the 13th century. Okay, so what do we have to find here in terms of ghosts? Well, the first thing is within the building itself. Nowadays this building is called the National Justice Museum, and if you are ever in Nottingham, then I highly recommend a visit. If you ever come to Nottingham with me, I will definitely be trying to fit it into the itinerary, because it is well worth a visit. They have the fantastic original Victorian courtroom in there. They have all of the cells down below ground, and fantastic exhibitions about the history of crime and punishment through the ages. Really fantastic place. In a beautiful building, the 18th century. Now within the main hallway of the building, there have been ghostly sightings aplenty, because actually this building is said to be one of the most haunted buildings, not only in Nottingham, but in the whole of England. And so we can only really scratch the surface. But within the main entrance hall, people have reported numerous ghosts. The most commonly reported sightings are a young man in a uniform that some people say police, some people say a soldier. A woman dressed in long Victorian style dress, hat on. And most commonly of all, a gentleman who seems to have stepped straight out of the Victorian age, with a long black coat, a top hat and a beard. They are seen in the entrance hall to the building, which is just behind the central black door at the top of the steps. Now, the courtroom is also the site of hauntings, and that is where people see figures moving around like shadows. They also hear voices of people speaking, shouting and crying. But the courtroom, of course, is the site of very, very high emotions and passions. It's where people are on trial for their lives. People are trying to get justice for their loved ones or for themselves if they've been the victims of crime. And it's where people were threatened with some pretty gruesome consequences over the years, particularly in the past. So, you know, we had public executions, but you also had floggings. You had brandings where a red hot iron would be used to brand a particular mark on your skin, depending on what your crime was. And if you were on trial for a crime that could be punishable by branding, they did it there and then. They would have the brazier with the flames and with the hot irons ready there right in front of your eyes, so your potential punishment was there staring you in the face. Not surprising that that is a place of a lot of traumatic experiences over the years. And so very much perhaps not surprising that it is the place that is haunted, but also one of the most gruesome things to think about of this building is the fact that right there outside the central door was the spot, the main spot of public executions in Nottingham up until the 1860s. Public executions carried out there. They would put the platform up over the steps, their wooden platform, and then they would erect the gallows above the door, and on the appointed day, usually quite early in the morning, the hanging would be carried out. And of course, public executions were very popular. People would come in their hundreds or in their thousands if it was a particularly notorious criminal who was going to be getting their punishment that day. So this street is quite narrow. It would have been very crowded. There'd have been police, probably a line of police, making sure people couldn't get too close and interfere with the execution. People who lived in the houses behind me on the opposite side of the street, they would be able to charge people to go and stand at the windows on their upper floors and get a good view and be dry while they watched the execution. But unfortunately, it was not just the condemned who met their end here. Emma's favourite place, absolutely, Beatrice. There's one particular tragedy that occurred here back in 1844. A young girl from the area whose father was a clergyman, in her teens, she decided she wanted to go and see the execution of a particularly notorious local murderer. But her father said, no, you can't go, it's not for delicate young girls' eyes. But she and her friends were determined to go, so they told their parents they were going out for a walk, a picnic. They packed up their picnic blankets and everything, but they instead made their way down here to watch that execution. Now, it was a particularly boisterous crowd that day, and a particularly notorious criminal, and the crowd got very unruly, and at one point there was a big crush, almost a stampede, as people tried to get the best view. And during that crush, unfortunately, the young girl was trampled and killed, and her ghost has also been reputed to haunt the steps and the street outside the former courthouse. Now, there's one part of the building that I haven't talked about yet. It is the jail. The cells down here, as I've said, for hundreds of years. Very interesting thing about the jail is the carving, because they made a typo. This is supposed to say County Jail, G-A-O-L, but if you look very closely at the second word, G-A-O-L, you can see perhaps that the A and the O have been redone, and that's because originally it said County Gaol. If it's your goal to end up in there, then you probably deserve to be there. Now, the jail itself is reputed to be haunted by various ghosts. You know, there's so much activity reported, but there's one story in particular I want to focus on. Because this is such a haunted building, they hold a lot of kind of ghostly events, including all-night ghost hunts. And on one particular private event a few years ago, one of the women in the group broke off from the rest of the group, and she wandered off, but they didn't really realise. But then a few minutes later, they all heard her screaming at the top of her lungs, and they ran down through the cell block. They realised the voice was coming from the far end of the corridor, the condemned cell, where those who were due to be hanged outside the building spent their last night on earth. Now, the door was closed. They could not get it open. They thought, well, it must have somehow got locked. They fetched the keys. They could not unlock it. It was not locked. But after a couple of minutes of trying to get the door open, it just seemed as though something had been released, and the door opened quite normally. And they went inside, and they found the woman. She was physically unharmed, but she was pretty traumatized by her experiences. And when she'd calmed down, she told them that she'd gone into that room just having a little look, and as she stepped into the middle of the room, the door slammed shut behind her, and she went back to the door and tried to get it open, couldn't get it open at all. And then as she turned back into the centre of the cell, sitting on the iron bed in the room was a figure in a white dress, a figure of a woman. And that was when she started screaming. She said she looked at this figure, and after a time it just faded away. But it took a little bit longer for the door to be able to be opened again. And this particular appearance of this figure in a white dress in the condemned cell has been linked to a 19th century murderess who killed her husband on their wedding day because she believed that he had been having a relationship behind her back with her own sister, and she was one of the many people who were sentenced to death and met their end here at the end of the hangman's rope. So let's make our way along to what is going to be our final place, shall we? And ahead of us, it's a little bit lit. You can sort of see the outline of it. A St Mary's Church. So that's why I said I hope the bells that were ringing weren't St Mary's, because we've been pretty loud here to try and tell you these stories about the jail. St Mary's is the oldest church in Nottingham. It's at the highest point here on this, in the original town of Nottingham. And St Mary's medieval foundation, the current church dates back to the 14th century. But St Mary's is interesting because it is mentioned by name in the earliest Robin Hood legend that we have. So the earliest Robin Hood legend that we have access to from the late 13th century mentions in the story that Robin Hood went to St Mary's Church in Nottingham to pray. And while he was there, he was recognised by a monk who he had previously robbed while he was travelling through Sherwood Forest. And the monk fetched the local soldiers and they arrested Robin Hood. Where did they take him? They took him to the jail that we've just been talking about. So a great view of the church here with the full moon in the sky there. Isn't that great? It's all right, I'm not going to start howling. Usually it doesn't start till about 10, so we've got a little bit of time yet. So for anyone who has been following my Lunar Society talks on Restless, the reason they called themselves the Lunar Society, those men of 18th century Birmingham and Lichfield and the Midlands, they met every month the Monday evening closest to a full moon. So if the Lunar Society were around, they'd be meeting tonight. They'd be meeting at Matthew Bolton's house in Birmingham to discuss science and philosophy and all kinds of things. Pretty cool. The final part of my Lunar Society talks. For Robin Hood, you mean? I think they sort of waited until he came out of the church and then nabbed him. They wouldn't break the sanctity of the church to go in and sort of disturb him while he was at his prayers, but as soon as he came out, they swooped on him, dragged him off to jail. Now, some of the other people who were dragged not very far to jail, not in the time of the Robin Hood legends, but in the 18th century, were people that we know as Luddites. Now, I've sometimes been called a Luddite because I'm not the world's greatest with technology. But Luddites, we use the word these days for people who are not good with technical things. But originally, Luddites were workers in the textile industry who were fearful that new machinery and new methods of production would jeopardize their jobs and their livelihoods. And so they took action by breaking into the factories and smashing the machinery. And the Luddite movement started here in the East Midlands, in Nottingham and in Leicester, big textile producing areas. in the 18th century, and they're called Luddites because they said that the leader of their movement was somebody called Ned Ludd. Now it's pretty well established now that there was never any such person. Ned Ludd was just an invented name to give as a figurehead for their movement. There's actually a pub in the centre of Nottingham called the Ned Ludd, but the Luddites would have been breaking into the factories here, and of course they were causing a lot of damage to property and to machinery, and so quite draconian penalties were introduced by the authorities for anyone who was arrested in the process of being a Luddite, including at one time the death penalty. So if you were arrested breaking into a textile factory here with a view to smashing up the machinery, you'd be dragged down to the jail and you could be on trial for your life. Now these beautiful buildings here are lace showrooms and lace production buildings of the 19th century. So the lace market area, these were all lace factories and production areas. Beautiful Victorian architecture. Nowadays, no lace making here. Most of them have been converted. We are very lucky that the buildings have been preserved. Most have been converted into offices, apartments, a lot of nice bars and cafes around here. One of my favourite places to eat in Nottingham here, Annie's Burger Shack. A great place to eat. I don't know why. It's not raining anymore, hey? I just noticed that everybody I was passing no longer had umbrellas and hoods up. Elizabeth, yes, I think machinery certainly changed. Of course, it had a radical impact on the way people were working, just as it does today. You know, I'm wondering whether I can get to retirement age before AI completely replaces human translators and content creation. You know, the stuff you can do in the documentation world these days is pretty scary. So I do have quite a bit of sympathy for the Luddites. Now, when we talk about the lace market, the grandest of all the lace market buildings. Hi Alfie, I'll give you a shout out. Hi, how you doing? Thank you. So when we talk about the lace market, we talk most of all, the most impressive and splendid building of the lace market is this one. This is the Adams building, and it is named after the owner of the factory, needless to say. And the Adams lace market factory, the Adams lace factory, was the grandest, the best known, and also a great employer in terms of not just the jobs and the pay that they offered, but the conditions. We're talking Victorian England, where working conditions, you know, are not exactly known to be great. But factory inspectors came here to the Adams building and they praised the conditions, that they were safe and healthy, and the people had access to food and drink while they were at work. They had access to a library and training courses to educate themselves. They had access to a health insurance scheme. They even rented a local building as a chapel so that they were able to go and worship if they wished before or after their day of work. So very enlightened employer for the time. Someone was saying a big hi as well. Hello Gwen, nice to see you. The Adams building doesn't have any ghosts that I know of, but it's so nice we have to show it to you. And look at the doors. This is wrought iron, but done in a style of the lace, and the stonework above the door done in the style of the lace as well. Isn't that brilliant? Now we've got one more place to show you before we finish, and it's a fascinating building. I mean, it's a pub, so it's an endlessly fascinating building, but beyond that, the Angel microbrewery, known locally simply as the Angel or the Old Angel. But this is a building that I think is probably like no other in the world, because I don't know of any other building that has been during its lifetime a brothel, a police station, a chapel and a pub. If you know of one, let me know. But it began life as a brothel. It was then a police station before we had an organised police station, so kind of like the city watch house. Not at the same time, no, in different eras. You didn't have like the brothel upstairs and then the police station and a place to get a drink on the ground floor and a chapel in the basement. You know, different stages in its long history. So the ghosts that are reputed to be there are from those different eras. So the first is a ghost associated with its time as a brothel, because that is the ghost of a young woman she's clothed, so we're okay there, and she is seen walking around the building, and she is also heard singing as well. Very distinctive, because often you might hear a bit of singing in the Angel. It's not just the clientele, it is known as a live music venue, but they're also known for having a lot of rock music, so that's the kind of thing you'd be more likely to hear there. Very distinctive. But its time as a police station is also reflected in one of the ghosts, because it is reputed to be haunted by the spirit of one of the city watchmen. He was standing in the kitchen area of the building, and the building, you know, at that time was not in great shape. It was already not a new building by any stretch of the imagination, and the city watch would have been very poorly funded. They wouldn't have been able to afford to spend very much of on the upkeep of the building, but unfortunately the building was in such a poor state that on one day one of the walls close to the fireplace in the kitchen area collapsed partially and crushed one of the watchmen who was standing there and killed him. And in that part of the building, his footsteps are still heard on the wooden floor, heavy booted footsteps, and the jangling of keys which he would have been carrying as he went about his duties. So, a brothel, a city watch house, a chapel belonging to the Adams Lace family, and now a very nice pub and microbrewery. And it is where we are going to end our tour, but we're going to end it just over here with a lovely little piece of art on the wall, because it's a ghost tour, it's Halloween tomorrow, so let's finish it with a skull. Look at him, he's cool, isn't he? I'm going to come and stand with him. Here we are. Yeah, here's me and my friend in Nottingham, you see. Anybody's taking screenshots. So thank you so much to all of you for joining me tonight, and it's been great to have so many familiar names, but also some new names as well, and I love the fact that we're getting some new people checking out the tours. Hope you continue to watch the recorded videos, the live tours, and join up the Facebook group, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you want to check out more of my tours coming up, please feel free to do so. I am back tomorrow, Halloween tour. It's free to join again because it's a sponsored tour, so thank you to everyone who has donated towards the sponsored tour fund, and tomorrow I will be up in Chester. So I'm heading up to Chester tomorrow to bring you the tour. It's a bit earlier than this one because it's a lot further for me to drive home afterwards. So it is going to be at 6:30 UK time. But like all of the tours that are on YouTube, once the live tour's finished, it'll still be up on the channel. You can go in and watch it at your leisure. So if you can't make the time of the live tour, just go and check it out at another time. And thank you so much, Beatrice, for putting the link there to my Padlet page, where you can find details of all my tours and talks on all the different platforms, and links to get yourself booked onto those, the ones that you need to book for. And on that note, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. If you do want to support my work, this has been a free to join tour tonight, but do feel free to throw some tips in there using my Buy Me a Coffee or Ko-fi pages. The links to those are in the tour description and also on the main page of my YouTube channel. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope to see you again tomorrow, and if not, very soon after that. So here from Nottingham, have a great rest of your evening, and bye for now.